Hi folks, welcome back to the Who is Man module. This is part 7, week 8, and we're looking at free will and responsibility. The first 2 weeks, the first part was about whether man was like an animal or something different. And it's clear from the evidence we see that man is significantly different from animals. And he's not just a highly developed animal, there's something different. And the Bible explains what God says about that he chose to make man, and that man is unique. And so you have this picture of what man was made like in the beginning, that man fell, that man can be redeemed or brought back, and that he's destined for glory. And when you see the whole picture, you think God really values mankind. He has a great value for mankind. And you look at it and you think, well, God placed value on mankind by paying for him with his own son. And as we looked at the big plan, you could see that God had a really big plan for man. You could see the whole scale of things, and you could see that God had a plan for man. But most often people aren't so interested in what God thinks of mankind. They're more interested in what God thinks of them. Most people are more interested in not in whether man has a value, but in whether they, as a man, have a value. And so we're going to get a little more personal with the rest of the module, and not specific about any singular person here, not even myself. I'm not even going to tell you loads of details about me, but looking at what it means to be an individual and looking at who man is as a unique person. And one of the things that makes us all unique is what we do with our free will. As we're looking at man, we've said that God gave him free will. And what man does with that free will is quite important. It's part of what makes him an individual. So let's just, if you follow through the plan, then we're on part 7 of 10, looking at free will and responsibility. And those are our topics for the module. We'll start with that discussion question as usual. If you've got somebody to turn to, ask them a question, or if you don't, note down some answers. Why is free will significant when it comes to individuality? Why are those two things connected? Am I an individual because we're all made unique, we've all got different fingerprints, or is it more than that? Is it more than just my eyes have different irises than yours, and my fingers have different prints than yours, and therefore we're all unique? Or is there more to it? One of the things that makes us all unique is that we choose things. And what we choose is a very significant part of our uniqueness. There are lots of choices that we make that are have no massive life-changing value. If I get up today and I put on a grey shirt, and tomorrow I get up and I put on a nice white shirt, and then the following day I put on an Ireland rugby shirt, and the day after I put on a Liverpool football shirt, I don't think it'll make a difference to anybody at all whatsoever. But those are me. That's what I like, and I wear this and I wear that and I choose. And there's something about every choice that we make that is part of our individuality. The responses that we make, it makes us individual. And so our free will, our ability to choose is one of the things that makes us all go different directions. There's certain people I choose to be around, and there's certain people I choose not to be around, and other people will choose the people that I don't like being around and not the people I do like being around. And some people will not like anybody, and some people like everybody, and we all choose different people. We choose different things. Now, some of those things are mildly important. Some of them are almost unimportant at all. What we eat, as long as we have a reasonable diet, right? Isn't that what it comes down to? As long as I eat some of a variety of things and get some vegetables sometimes, it's not specifically about whether I like this particular food and you don't. Those are individual choices, what we like the taste of and what we enjoy. But it's not about defining who we are. The frustrating thing is that people who don't have an eye on the big things that really do define who we are start to define who we are by smaller things. Sexuality becomes a key identifier. Gender now has become an identifier. I identify as a particular gender. And those things, or as no particular gender in some cases, and those things are not the be all and end all in God's picture. Sexuality is a temporary thing that only exists in this world. Whether one is right or wrong is not the question we're here to debate. My point is that the people who have missed the big purpose and the big meaning and the big plan that we were talking about last week for man, then try and find meaning and purpose and value in other things, in small things, in abilities, in skills, in their friendship circles, in the way they've responded to things, in their answers. But free will itself is an amazing gift. As we think about free will and how it makes us individual, it's an amazing gift. What I mean by that specifically is that without free will, if Adam had been made and had sinned and had made the decision to turn against God, without free will, we have no way of changing that. Adam choosing to disobey God puts him on terms as an enemy of God's. And if there is no way to change that, if we don't have free will to turn around, to come back to God, to make a different decision, then we would be stuck as enemies of God. And so the gift of free will for each of us is huge. Not just because of those little small things, what we eat and what we wear and who we hang out with, but on the really big scale, in terms of that picture that we were talking about with God, that man has this choice to turn back to God. Through Jesus, we can turn back to God. And free will is a huge gift because it's a way back. I can turn back to God. So, for example, in John 3:16, it says, whoever will shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And that's whoever chooses, whoever takes their free will and decides to turn back to God will not perish, but will have everlasting life. And the picture is that we have this free will, we have this choice. And it's important that we understand that we have free will. Yes, we were talking last week that God has a plan, but we also believe that we have free will. And it's an amazing gift because we can change things. The key is that free will can lead to change. If I feel bad about a decision that I've made, I can change that decision in many cases. If I've done something that is irreversible, it's irreversible. But most of the things that we do, we can apologize for or turn around on or change our habits or do something differently. And we can change who we are. What is amazing about being an individual made by God is that we can choose different things. We can change our choices and respond in different ways. And so free will is a very key thing to understanding who we are. You're unique, and God has given you unique opportunities to choose different things, and you can make different choices than other people would. It's funny because I have family, my grandparents on both sides were missionaries, and they brought up their children knowing God, and yet there are children and aunts and uncles in my family who don't follow God, who decided not to asked for forgiveness, who chose their own way. And yeah, with all that upbringing, with all that nurture, and with the same nature as siblings, yeah, but they choose differently. We all have this unique ability to choose. But the amazing thing is that what we choose can lead to real change. God made this world temporary because things can be changed in it. The temporary nature of man and of the world is really important, because without temporal things, things can't change in time. Right? What does change mean? It means that at one time it is one way, and at another time it's another way. But if you're eternal, there is no time. To the creatures that serve God in heaven, to disobey him would be to eternally disobey him. We need a temporal world for things to be able to change. And change is really important, because without change, we would all be lost. Without the free will to turn back to God, we would all be enemies of God. The offspring of Adam who chose to disobey God would never be able to choose to come back to him. And so change is really important. And that means free will is really important. The God who made us with this ability to choose things. And it shapes who we are, and how we use that free will, in particular, how we use that free will in response to God, defines everything about who we are. And that is the key to individuality. Now, we'll talk about individuality in another section later on, but people find their individuality in all sorts of things, in all sorts of choices that they've made, in all sorts of decisions about what they wear, what they look like, who they hang around with. And again, things like sexuality that are not key to God's creation. And that free will that we have lets us choose all sorts of different things. And we think those things define us. What really defines us is how we use that free will in response to God, because that's an eternal definition. What we choose about God in this life will carry on to the next one. What we choose about what clothes we wear in this life will not carry on to the next one. In fact, the clothes that I choose to wear will be abandoned as soon as I find a woman who tells me, you're not wearing that anymore. Okay, no bother, right? The free will that we have and how we exercise it in small things matters in this life, because it's a joyful response to God. But it's the response to God that really matters. So we make all these choices all the time. I wonder if you think about how often you exercise your free will. How many things did you choose to do today? Choosing what you eat, what you wear when you get up, what you say to people, how you think about certain things and the decisions you make, what you did at work, or if you didn't go to work. All the different choices we're making all the time are us using our free will. And so there's a lot to be said about the free will that God gave us. One of the things that makes you valuable individually is what you do with your free will. So I've just a weird discussion question for you here. We'll maybe do a bit more of this on Thursday night as we have a discussion online on Zoom. But here's discussion question 15. Does it matter what song you sing? If you're singing a song, does it matter what song you sing? In some elements, it does matter, because some elements of song are about God. Some songs glorify God and some songs glorify other things. But does the tune matter? Does the style matter? Does the way you're singing it matter? Does it matter whether you can even sing in tune or not? What matters about the way we use our free will? We make so many decisions that make us individuals. And which of those decisions matter and last? Which of those decisions does God see and enjoy or get involved in? Or is he, what is it about you that God is seeing and enjoying and getting life out of? And those are the things that really matter. Jesus talked about storing up treasures in heaven. And that's about enjoying the things that belong there, spending your time on stuff that matters in eternity. And that will define you, not just here, but there as well. That'll be part of the definition of who you are in eternity. So maybe you have a think about even some of those little minor choices, but how you can do that in response to God, in a feeling of joy and an experience of life. And I can sing and dance and wave my arms, and I can do that for my good or for his. I can sing a Christian song without God in my heart, and I can sing a stupid song about a woman with God in my heart, and the responses are very different. So we'll maybe talk a bit more about that discussion question on Thursday, but I wanted to throw it in there and give you something to think about. So if free will is so important and the things that we choose are so important, how does that connect with responsibility? Does it matter whether we're held responsible for our choices, or is it just whatever goes and we'll see what happens? Is there a connection? Should there be? And how does that work? I'll give you a second to pause. Again, turn to somebody if you've got somebody. Write something down if you haven't. What's the connection between free will and responsibility? If we are created by God, which I believe we are, but if we are, then God defines us, right? He decides what we do and who we are. We were talking last time about God's big plan is sovereignty. If God is totally responsible for you, then it's unfair of him to judge you, isn't it? A lot of people have an issue with God because they think God will judge them for something and it's not fair. Why should God judge me for my sexuality? Or why should God judge me for this or for that? Actually, God's primary reason for judging somebody is whether they turn to him or not. That's the main reason. But as somebody who created us and gave us free will, then there's a reason that God can judge us. If he made us to do something and that was all we could do, and that's who we were, then it would be him that would be responsible. If we were robotic, if God had made us without the opportunity to sin, then we would be doing what we did because he made us do it. And then he is responsible for us. One of the things that God wanted was a creation that is responsible, that can make choices and be responsible. And to do that, he has to give that creature free will. So he had to say to Adam, there's a tree, don't eat the fruit. And that, in that giving that free will for Adam to choose to do what God wanted or to choose to go against him, that choice is the free will that Adam had. And in having free will, then Adam can be judged on what he did with it. Adam can be judged on whether he used that free will to keep doing what God said, or used that free will to turn against him. And that's where free will and responsibility are very closely connected. Free will is the choice to do what God wants or not. And responsibility is God saying, well, which did you choose? And it's particularly important that those two go together. Let me explain that a little bit more. Responsibility without free will would be abuse. If God made you to do something and then blamed you for doing it, that would be abuse. If God told you to do this and do this and do this and do this, and you did this and this and this and this and this, and then he held you responsible and punished you and judged you for doing it, that would be abuse. It would be unjust and unfair and not right of God. Now, we were saying last time that God is not fair. He's better than fair. But that picture of you being able to choose is important, because then it's not automatic. It's not just the way you were constructed. It is your choice. Without free will, you can't be held responsible, because what you were designed to do and did is the responsibility of the designer. Think of any piece of equipment, right? I have a remote control right here. If this remote control works the TV or whatever it's designed to work, that's great. That's what it's designed to do. If it doesn't work the TV, whose fault is it? Is it the remote control, or the one who forgot to put the batteries in it, the operator, or the manufacturer? It's definitely not the remote control's fault. It is just a piece of equipment. And without free will, as robots, as equipment almost, we would do what we were made to do and couldn't be held responsible for it. If I can't get the TV to go on, I might want to smash this thing. Actually, I should probably just put new batteries in it. That's most often the reason it's not working. But I might want to smash this thing. Oh, the stupid remote control. But it's not the remote control's fault. Either there's something wrong with the design, or there's something wrong with the maintenance, or there's something wrong with me in the way I'm pointing at the wrong TV or the wrong thing, right? But we have free will. And so therefore, it's not irresponsible of God, and it's not abusive of God to hold us to account for that. If somebody, Jesus tells the story of the talents. He gives, the king goes away, he gives 5 talents to one guy, 2 talents to another guy, 1 talent to another guy. And he says, go and invest that, go and do something with that money, and I'll come back. And then he says, well, what did you do with those talents? I gave you 5 talents. What have you done? I've turned them into 10. That's great. Well done. I gave you 2 talents. What have you done? I've turned them into 4. Brilliant. Well done. What about you? I hid the one that you gave me in a hole so that it wouldn't get lost, and that was it. It's right for the king to hold him responsible. He gave them the talents and expects them to do something with it. He knows that they have the ability and the free will and the choice to do something with those talents. It's only because they've got the free will to go and do something with that they can be held to account. Without that free will, it would be abuse. But the other side is very much more common in the world today. Free will without responsibility. There's a whole lot of programs for young people where you're not allowed to hold them responsible. And it's ridiculous, and it's very unhelpful, because they have the free will to choose to be whatever they want. And then they're not held responsible. One of the things that frustrates me is that if a parent gets their kid into school uniform, drops them at the door of the school, waits till they go through the doors, and the child decides to turn around after they've left and walk out of the school and take the day off, the parent is held responsible. And I don't know what more you can do than make them go there in their uniform and be there, and yet they're the one that has to pay the fine or whatever. The kid can get away with anything. And that's the way our society is with a lot of things. People often want free will without responsibility. And that's where man makes excuses for so many different behaviors. Oh, it's not my fault. I have a mental health problem. And I'm aware that we do have mental health problems. And I'm not saying everybody with a mental health problem is wrong, but don't make it an excuse for things that you've chosen. I think of those who say, oh, I can't, yeah, it's an illness. It's not addiction. It's an illness. Well, no, it's an addiction. And you need to get that sorted. And you're still responsible. And I think of those who just in general say, well, I couldn't do it today. And I make excuses myself. I should have sent that email and I haven't. I should have got round to doing that and I haven't done it. And I want the free will to choose whatever I want to do without the responsibility. But what you end up with is a big mess. You end up with anarchy, people choosing whatever they want, but nobody being held responsible for it. And that is no good either. If people are free to choose, but are not held responsible for it, that is where the law becomes a real issue. We end up at a point in our society right now where we're only a few steps from the worst things being legal. The only reason horrible things like rape and being a paedophile are not legal is because the majority of people think they're bad. Legally, there's no standpoint where those things are officially wrong. And the law says, oh, that's not good. Yes, we'll put you in prison for that. That's wrong. But it's not held with a clear responsibility, with a clear idea of what truth is. And so therefore, we could easily find somebody saying, well, I didn't feel like it was wrong, so I just went ahead and did it. And people want the free will without responsibility. And we cannot live like that. It doesn't work. We end up with you deciding something's right, which I've decided is wrong, and we end up lost. So free will and responsibility need to go together. You're responsible for the choices you make. Whether you turn to God or not is up to you. That is the key choice that we make. And we will be responsible for that choice. God will ask us and we'll know the answer. And it will be proved what we chose, who we were, and what decision we made on that front. And on top of that, what we add to that life is a huge amount about what way we followed that up. We decided to turn to God and then spend our whole life running away from him. It's very weird. It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. And James says, well, you say you've got faith, but you don't show it. It doesn't look like it. Show who you are. Follow up that choice of free will with more choices of free will. Repentance is the idea of change. And repentance comes through the process of being dissatisfied with the way things are and choosing to change it. The word is about doing a U-turn, repenting. It's a military term for turning around. And the dissatisfaction is the first part of it. And then choosing to do something about it is the second part of it. And we are held responsible for whether we choose to keep going, knowing that we're wrong, or turn around and turn back to God. We choose whether we follow what Adam did, or we turn to Jesus and we ask for forgiveness. Whether we continue to be fallen like Adam, or whether we turn back to Jesus and are redeemed. Those are choices we make with our free will. And it's right that we're held responsible for that. If we're not held responsible for those choices, God is saying it doesn't matter. What does that tell the rest of the universe? That's just as unjust as God punishing us when we haven't made the choice. The rest of the universe is faithfully serving God. And if we choose not to, and God says, it doesn't matter, what does that say to the rest of the universe, to the principalities and powers, to the angels in the heavenly realms? It says to them, it doesn't matter. God doesn't really care. And then they think, well, what if I change my mind? What if I do something wrong? Can I just get away with it? Can I just be me? That wouldn't be right. Free will and responsibility need to go together. So if we're understanding that God has got a big plan, he's going to bring man from the beginning where he was perfect, through fallenness, out the other side and bring him to heaven. We're responsible for where we are on that journey and where we end up. Yes, God has the plan. Yes, he includes you in the plan, but you have to decide with your free will that you're dissatisfied with being fallen and you want to be redeemed. You're dissatisfied with being a sinner and you want to come to Jesus and ask him to forgive you. Those are very real choices that we make. That's how we use our free will. And that's the most important part of it. Free will and responsibility are designed to go together. And if you want to understand your value and your importance, you've got to start with this free will and what you've done with it and how you've responded to God. Because as he is everything in this universe, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who's over all and in all and through all, and who in him all things are held together. If it's him that it's about, then your response to him is the first question. So we will be held responsible for our decisions. And what comes down to is, what change comes down to is really two things: that we're dissatisfied with something and that we have the ability to change it. Dissatisfaction is a big part of what our free will is about. If I am dissatisfied with the way my house looks, I will hoover it or clean it or tidy it. If I am dissatisfied with how my stomach feels, I will go and get something to eat. That requires me having two things: one, the dissatisfaction with my stomach, and two, having access to some food. Those two things mean I can change the situation. And so it is with so much in our life. We can make changes if two things happen. One, we feel dissatisfied with how they are, and two, we have the ability to do something about it. Free will is that ability to do something about it, to be able to turn around, to make a different choice. And even the worst of men have that ability to choose. People say to me, well, would Hitler have been forgiven if he'd asked? Well, I believe yes. But Hitler went further and further and further and further away from asking for forgiveness. He did not want forgiven. He wanted his own way, to the point that when he was about to be captured, he says, well, I would rather shoot myself than do what somebody else feels is just. That idea is, he is not turning from the decision he's made. He is not dissatisfied with the decision he's made. But if we are dissatisfied with the decision we've made, we have the ability to change it. God has given us an opportunity to turn back to him through Jesus, to be forgiven for all the screw-ups that we've made. And we need to be dissatisfied with that to find change. One of the biggest things that I've noticed is that there's a lot of people who like the idea of being a Christian and who will pray a little prayer, but they weren't ever really dissatisfied with not having God in their life, with not being his child. They didn't feel they were lost or dead in their sins. And then there's no urgency to change it. And yet God says, if you're dead in your sins, you're dead in your sins. And you need to change it. So dissatisfaction is a huge part of how we use our free will, not just on that big scale, but in smaller things as well. We change things because we want to change them. If I feel like my beard is weird, I get rid of it. I cut my hair when I feel like it's too long. I've been cutting my hair for 20 years. I can do that. I have the ability to change it. And if I'm dissatisfied with the way it looks right now, I go ahead and I change it. That is how we use our free will. But God says, well, because I've given you that free will, you'll be held responsible for it. one of the keys to individuality is that you will be individually responsible for who you are. It's one of the keys to your value, that your value is decided by who you choose to be. Do you choose to be a child of God, the greatest of all his riches? Or do you choose to reject God and be an enemy? Those are the choices that we make. And the results of those choices define so many things, because we will be held responsible. So as we've thought about what it means to be under God's plan, that man is special, that all of mankind is created with brilliant abilities and beauty and skill, that we screwed up, but God can bring us back. The key thing is that God can bring us back, but we're responsible to turn back to him. And that choice of free will is the biggest thing that defines who we really are. Do we turn back to God, or do we do our own thing? Do we live for God and with God, or do we make our own choices? How we choose is how we will be judged. How we have gone about making that decision is how we will be held responsible. God is not unjust. He has given us free will. And that means he has also given us responsibility. Much as this world would like to get rid of the responsibility and other people's free will, God says, no, if you've got free will, you've got responsibility. I think of some of the things that Donald Trump said during his presidency, and I think, do you realize that you're responsible for anything? He always talked around things, made excuses, talked some rubbish, and is then not responsible. Of course he's responsible. God will hold him responsible. He gave him free will to choose. He said, oh yes, I believe in God. Well, what do you know about the Bible? Nothing. And you think, do you know anything? The key decisions that we make, that make us an individual, that make us valuable, that make us important, it's not just the plan that God has, but where we fit in the plan that God has. That's where you find your value and your identity and your importance. And so, much as every single human being is created beautiful, when we're fallen, we need to find a way back. Or what we are when we're fallen is so far from enough. It's so far from who we really could be. It's so far from our actual value to God that we need to turn back to him to find it. Our meaning and our value is vastly reduced. So as we think of, first of all, how amazing man is, but how amazing am I? Well, really, the first question is, what have you done with your free will? Sometimes I think of some of the things that I've added on to my faith. I turned to God when I was young, but I've added things on. I used to sing like nobody's business because I wanted to praise my God. I enjoy talking about him. I want to tell others about him. Those decisions that I've made with my free will are about me backing up that choice I've made to turn to God. And God is delighted in those little things. What you do with your free will is a big part of what you'll be responsible for and what God will judge you on in the end. So alongside his plan, there is free will. People often say these things can't work together. They just do. I could explain different pictures that people use, but I think the simplest way is just to say both are true. God gave you free will, and yet he is Lord of all things. And we just trust both are true. If you accept that both are true, you realize the value that God's given you. He's allowed you to make your own choices. He said, out of everything in the universe, I'm going to give you the right to choose who you'll be. You can choose any direction that you go. Those things are amazing gifts of God. And he is right to hold us responsible for what we do with them. So our summary for today: free will, an amazing gift of God. Individuality, based a lot on what we do with our free will. Responsibility, absolutely intrinsically linked with free will. And how we change things through dissatisfaction and the ability to change. Understanding those things can give us a real picture of who we are and how we're valuable to God. How delighted is he when somebody turns to him and runs to him and asks for forgiveness and wants to change their life to include him in it and honor him and glorify him. Isn't that amazing? God clearly thinks so. So that's our topic for today.